Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we're talking about all the Rocky films.
Yes, the Rocky series.
Yes, including Creed.
Because I find them absolutely fascinating. I mean, I was thinking, you could do a whole module just on race in the Rocky films, really. I think you could also do a whole module on post-classical Hollywood cinema. The first film begins in 1976, right in the middle of the Hollywood Renaissance and so on. And then kind of by the mid-80s, the Rocky films become like the archetypal high-concept film, right? And then actually the Ryan Coogler, Creed, it's almost like an auteur indie-ish film, yeah? Mm-hmm. In a different context where, so many of the big studio productions are comic book films. This is a film about character and people and race and, So I find them all very interesting. I also found absolutely fascinating the way that the films create their own mythos, right? That every film... So at the beginning, the ending of Rocky 1 is the beginning of Rocky 2. Mm-hmm. The ending of Rocky 3 is the opening, minutes of...
The first 5 films you could watch in a row because every subsequent film starts with literally the last scene of the first film.
I mean, that's fascinating. And then they also have... Well, they have training montages. They have montages about the fitness and, the building up to the fight. They have the fight itself always at the end. And the films have this interesting structure where it's almost like the first hour is about the resolution of some dilemma. So, in Rocky 2 is he spends his money, right? And then has to go back in the ring, right? So the first half hour is about some interpersonal dilemma issue. The second one is the build up to the fight and the fight itself. And the other thing that I found absolutely fascinating for the series as a whole is that they have these memory montages. That there's always like a 3 or 4 minute montage which the character remembers or
I think 3 or 4 minutes might be overdoing it.
Okay, so
I think you tend to
they feel like 3 or 4 minutes.
They're significant, and very often they happen like during the course of the film sometimes, but they also happen very often during the final fight where Rocky takes a punch. And Creed it happens to as well. Creed takes a big punch and he's knocked down, and then in getting up everything flashes before his eyes.
Yes.
And that gets him up.
Yes.
Yeah.
I also found fascinating the way not all films in the series, but some of them are almost like a marker for a reading of American society at a particular point. So I think the first Rocky with its bicentennial setting is one of them. Is it the third Rocky, the one with Drago?
4th is with Drago.
The 4th, it's like Reaganite America at its most extreme that film signifies.
1985 that one came out.
Yeah, so, so there are kind of, particular films that almost ask for a social reading. Well, this was America at this point,
Yeah.
So I found, it's a fascinating series with very few good films, I would say.
Yeah, so when I was watching them, I did the first 2, and then I did 3, 4, 5 Balboa and the first half of Creed in one day, basically. And that was a rocky ride, which ended up with 2 I'd seen before that I think are my 2 favourites, Balboa and Creed. But those other 3, 4 and 5 are rough going.
They are.
They're not good films. They are entertaining and they kept me going. It's not like I got bored really at any point. I think I maybe tuned out in a bit of 3 maybe. I think that might be my least favourite. 4 is, as you've been saying, just 5 MTV music videos strung together, and what's going on with the portrayal of Russia and the contrast between Drago training with science and machines, and then you've just got Rocky chopping wood and stuff. They're ridiculous but quite good fun. 5 I actually didn't mind. I saw, I think you and others were saying on Facebook that that's clearly the worst. And I actually rather liked its return to the kind of squalor of Philadelphia. That was working for me, I must say, in a kind of, we said in the first podcast on Rocky 1, just on Rocky 1, that film has such a sense of place. And that returns to that sense of place, I think.
Yeah, but it's so crude.
Yes.
So, yeah, as you say, I think they're all watchable, but actually, and again, some people are going to be offended by me describing it in this way, when you say it's always entertaining the way that television is. And actually, it's worth thinking of the series in relation to television, because I've heard Rocky in interviews saying, well, you know, people were always like offended by the idea of making a sequel, you know, and my thinking was, well, why? You know, kind of people love these characters, they return to them all the time, you just have to look at any television series, right? So what's wrong with doing kind of these films as a series? And, you know, fair enough. But when you have the money and the resources, you know, to make a film, and you end up doing like the equivalent of a bad Columbo episode.
Well, what struck me is how they turned it into a soap opera. So, you know, the first one is quite subtle and it's quite sweet, and it has this view of Philadelphia and of life and this kind of portrait of working class immigrant life. And the second one, it turned into a soap opera almost immediately. So I knew at some point Adrian was going to die because she's not in Rocky Balboa. Yeah. But I couldn't remember, I remember how she died. It is mentioned that she died of cancer. But it meant that basically through the first 5 films I'm going, at some point she must die. And I thought when she goes into the coma in Rocky 2, I thought, God, they're going to do it that dirty. She's going to die that early on. You know, and of course she doesn't ultimately. She pulls out of it. But I thought, like, this is such a soap opera thing, right? She, you know, they have this relationship. He's spending money he doesn't have. They have to do the fight. She goes into a coma. Like, the high drama of it. Such a world apart from what happened in the first film. And then it just goes on and on and on with just more and more. Like, and actually, what we're saying about how each film begins with the end of the previous one, like, it just turns these things into this just long string of just the next thing that happened in Rocky's life. And that's what it becomes about. You know, it becomes about, and then this happened, and then this, and then this, and it's just keeping up. It's like, it is like a soap opera when you, like, you know, the magazines about soap operas that are all about, you know, is so and so going to die? Is so and so going to reveal that they had so and so's baby? Rocky has a lot of that in the middle 5, you know, films.
I mean, I want to pick up on 2 points here. First, this thing about the death of Adrian, and secondly, I want to talk about soap opera. But I think it's a sign of Stallone's extraordinary narcissism in the series, right? You know, which manifests itself in all of those shots of him, you know, his body and his changing body, and, you know, kind of the clothes I mean, you know, he's also like a peacocky Italian in that he likes to look good. Yeah, bella figura, whatever. But my God, he takes it to extremes, right? But that's okay. You can take a little pleasure in that. It doesn't hurt anybody. But I thought the way that the film treated Adrian from the first film onwards is a problem. And to not give that character, which is absolutely central to the series, the weight of its death. Because you never see her die. You never see her problems, you know. It's almost like, you know, you're told she's dead, and then he goes to talk to her every day at the, you know, at the cemetery, right? So it's about him expressing his hurt, not about her dying. And actually, we're not shown her death, I don't think.
No.
You know? And I think that's terrible, to deny such a central character in the series their death. I mean, think of Apollo Creed, you know, how, yeah? So there's a kind of a misogyny, I think, actually, in denying the viewer that death, particularly if, as we've talked about in the first film, yeah, they complete each other. They're part of the same thing. I mean, you know, it's about him, yeah, but she's absolutely central to the meaning of the first film. So to deny us her death, I think, is a terrible thing that the film omits.
I don't agree with that. I think I mean, you've got to bear in mind it's 16 years between Rocky 5 and Rocky Balboa, which you know, they're filling in this time period, and what we were talking about in that first podcast about that sense of loneliness that I was not feeling towards Rocky or about Rocky. I completely get that in Balboa. It's a film that's about the process of mourning.
I get that very much.
Grieving, and I feel the hole that Adrian's left in his life. I didn't feel that it was a lack in the film that we didn't see Adrian's death. We're back to Rocky trying to get on with it.
Well, two things. It's true that you see him mourning and so on, but it's about his mourning. It's not about her death, And I do think that that it's kind of a shabby treatment of a major character. Actually, she's next to him, arguably the most important character in the film, perhaps next to Apollo Creed, in that first part of the series, and all of the other characters are given deaths, declines and deaths, except her. So I think it is a real lack, and he does obviously make it about him. It is about his mourning. The whole film is imbued with that sadness of her passing. Yeah, but I would have liked a scene. I would have liked it. Yeah, to be about her and their family. I mean, so I think, well, to me that's a problem. And actually, it's related to the second point I wanted to make, which is, the soap opera elements. Because what I really liked about the first film was that it was melodramatic. Yeah, that it was melodrama. And I really love melodrama. And I suppose when we talk about soap opera, we talk about failed melodrama. Yeah, kind of. And so I think that might be something worth exploring. Kind of why does the film succeed on equally melodramatic terms? Yeah, that the other films feel thin. Yeah, that they seem sutsy because they don't give you a rationale for the feeling. Yeah.
But I think it's like the storytelling in the subsequent films is more sketchy.
Yes.
I mean, literally sketchy. Like, it is thin.
Yes.
And so much of it is about just the plot development and the feeling that you got in the first film about how that affected characters' feelings and their feeling towards each other and their relationships is less of a concern as the series goes on.
Yeah.
To the point where, as you say, like the high concept of number 4 is it becomes just America versus Russia. It's not about people anymore.
Yeah. It's very interesting, actually, because, the first film introduces us to a whole set of characters that, will continue for many films. We talked about how so many of the scenes were iconic, and they were partly iconic visually, but partly also because of feelings attached to them. And actually, when I think back of almost the whole of the other 5 films, there's no new character except Drago, who will continue.
Clubber Lang.
Who's he?
He's the Mr. T character.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not saying that. I'm sorry, I phrased that badly. It's not that there are no new characters, but that there are no new characters that have a weight in the series as a whole.
Right. Okay.
And again, also no. If you think there's 5 films afterwards, and you get the scene with the chair in the tree at the cemetery, that becomes something. Drago returns, and then that's about it.
Yeah, they go back to Mickey's gym. I mean, it's a series that's very interested in its own past.
Yes.
And interested in, as you say, its mythos. And that's from early on, like you say, ending with or starting with the scene from the film before, is like, remember this, let's go on.
Yeah.
And then it becomes, actually, with those memory montages, it's this question of everything that we've done, everything that we had. And in Rocky Balboa, when he's early on, he's mourning, and he... is it the anniversary of her death, or is it her birthday? It's some important day, I forget which, but that's why he's visiting the grave. And he's there with Paulie, and Paulie would rather forget because he didn't treat his sister very well. But they're going around the city and they're visiting all these old places. They go to the ice rink, which is now demolished. And,
yes.
They go to Rocky's old house where he sees a ghostly figure of her. Yes. She vanishes. Which is obviously like, this is stuff that when I first saw Rocky Balboa, not having the context of the previous films, I would have sort of got, oh yeah, he's remembering his past, but wouldn't have meant much to me.
Yeah.
Now it means a lot more.
The bar, the gym, they all...
Actually, Marie, meeting little Marie, who's the girl who he told to stop hanging out with the pricks in the first film, when she said, what did you say, something creepo? Screw you, creepo.
Screw you, creepo, yeah.
And then that comes back up in this. She doesn't remember saying it, but he remembers it. It's a good insult and it hurts. It's so interested in its own past. I suppose it's audience pleasing, right? Like it rewards the audience's investment in the series.
Absolutely. And actually, I think the series is very interesting to talk about in terms of seriality, because I mean, this is the period where you have Jaws, and then Jaws 2, Jaws 3, Jaws 4, And then Star Wars will come out, Star Wars 1, blah, endless to the present. The Superman films are introduced at this time, right? So, how does the film manage, to be a series, and to engage the audience with, their own memories of past pleasures, in relation to the series? I actually think that the film does that quite well. I kind of, I can imagine kind of people's pleasures in remembering their pleasures in, kind of those sequences when, in those memory montages or the revisiting that you're talking about in Rocky Balboa. But the point remains to me that the first film kind of sets up the root vocabulary for the whole series, which is not in itself a problem, because that is also the function of first films like that. Though I don't imagine that it was conceptualized as a series, but nonetheless, it's good that But 5 films later and no new characters, no new settings, kind of. It's not as if film 5 reworks the settings in the same iconic way in the films of 3 or 4. No, they always go back to the 1, and So I think it's a failure. It signals how bad, or the relative failure of those films, that all of the memories invested in it and all that remains iconic is largely due to the first film. As I said, there are exceptions. Characters are introduced that then reappear, but very few of them.
I mean, the one thing that really comes back from like films 2 to 5 is Ivan Drago and Apollo's death, because they come back in Creed and Creed 2, where Creed's son didn't know his dad. He's a son from an affair. This is what the film gives you. And in Creed, he goes to Rocky's restaurant, Eighties, and he's looking at the wall and he talks about the past, and then he reveals that who he is, and he convinces Rocky of it because he knows this past. He knows about this secret third fight that we've seen in the end of Rocky 2.
But we also don't see who won it. So that is a real revelation.
That's true. And then obviously in Creed 2, it comes back very strongly with Drago, because it becomes the fathers and the sons kind of matching up in a sense. Obviously Apollo's not there to be Adonis's dad, but Rocky is. And that's the first film I mentioned to you, the first film where they don't carry on the fight. Like throughout the films, every time the trainer says, "We've got to stop the fight, you're getting mashed," the boxer always says, no, carry on, I want to fight this guy. And they do.
Yes.
The trainers don't listen, they don't do their jobs. If they just would do their jobs. And actually, when Drago throws in the towel, I mean, it took them 8 films for someone to do that.
Yes. I love seeing Drago in the Creed 2. I love seeing Dolph Lundgren, kind of still looking very handsome, but actually being able to act as well. Len, let's move the discussion there, because I actually think, that, one of the things that is so fascinating about the series is then how, things get turned around. So if the question of race is bubbling under the surface of all the first Rocky films, then even though I think Creed and Creed 2 are not really about race, they definitely re-inflect all of that stuff. And it really kind of made me think of, there's a wonderful piece by Richard Dyer, where he argues that, he's not for auteurism. He doesn't consider himself an auteurist, but that, he thinks who makes movies is very important. And you see that, in Creed and Creed 2. They're made by black filmmakers. The way that the filmmakers are lit are completely different. There are all kinds of cultural references that are completely different. The music is completely different. And it's all much, much better, than in most of the Rocky films. And the other thing is that Ryan Coogler, and I forget who the director of Creed 2 is.
Stephen Capel Jr.
They're real filmmakers in a way that Sylvester Stallone, who directed most of the others. Most of the Rocky series is John G. Avildsen, who did the first one, and Sylvester Stallone.
John G. Avildsen did number 5 as well.
As well, they are nowhere near the filmmakers that Stephen Capel and Ryan Coogler are. Kind of the films are a pleasure to see. You get a sense of mise en scène. If there's a composition, it's used to signify something rather than with Avildsen, who doesn't know where the fuck to put the camera. So yeah, I think vastly, to me...
Most of the actors, I'd say, are also not a match for Michael B. Jordan and Tessa Thompson in them as well. Actually, I think Sylvester Stallone gives his best performances outside of Rocky 1 in these last
Oh, without
three.
a doubt, you know.
He ups his game in them, I suppose.
Yeah, he does.
But those two, Jordan and Thompson, bring so much quality.
Yeah.
And so much ability and heart and you know, maybe I'm speaking too ill of the previous actors, but they're much simpler performances you get in those middle films.
Yeah, they're great.
And much simpler conceptualization of characters as well. It's not all the actors' fault, really.
No.
They are more complex, these latter films.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I think Burt Young and Burgess Meredith and Talia Shire are fantastic in the first one, right? Afterwards, it's like the films are like a piss take on the audience in a way, you know. So on the one hand, you want to give them what they want. It's all about pleasing the audience. But on the other hand, you're really shortchanging them by just giving them fast food junky, you know, crap stuff, really.
Yeah.
And the Creed films completely shift the orbit. You know, it's like on a completely different scale to those films. I think Creed 2 is a kind of masterpiece, actually. You know, I mean, I'd have to look at it more.
Creed 2, really?
Sorry, Creed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about Creed 2, like, if Creed 2 is a crummy Creed movie, then it's so much better than the Rockies are as a crummy Rocky movies. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, I don't think Creed 2 is crummy. I really liked it, actually. I think it's very good. It's just, you know...
Yeah, but it's like in comparison to the first one. Like, Rocky, great, and the sequel's not so great. Creed, great, the sequel,
I think
but still very good.
It's very good. And actually...
But don't you think it goes into some of that soap opera stuff that I was talking about with the Rockies, where it becomes a little bit about the development of the family and they become a little bit the thing with the baby and where we're moving and...
I mean, yes, and to be honest, the thing with the baby, I mean, I also thought that was cheap, that it's trying to pull on your heartstrings, and also just completely unbelievable. I mean, I think nowadays, for me, it would be hard to imagine, you know, somebody who was crumpled the way they were at their daughter being deaf, right? Like, you know, okay, she's deaf, it's unfortunate. You know, she can learn sign language, you know, I mean, kind of, you know, the idea that he might not love the baby because it's deaf, I mean...
Was that an idea in the film? He might not love the baby?
Yes, I think Stallone asks that question. You love her anyway or something,
yeah,
you know? Yeah. And he was saying, yeah, but, you know, the film posits the question.
Sure.
You know, because actually the deafness, that it might be inherited, you know, it's such an issue, right? Whereas, you know, I thought that was a cheap, almost non-issue, right? Like, I mean, if they'd lost the baby, you know, if the baby had to be institutionalized, like, you know, if it was brain damage or something, you know, too, I could imagine that as being like, yeah, because you'd have to give it up, and yeah, so that would be something. But, and don't get me wrong, I don't think being deaf is like a gift. But, you know, it's not the end of the world, yeah? Like, kind of, you know.
No, sure. But I mean, I can certainly sympathise with a parent worrying about, you know, their kid.
I know, worried, yes. Being emotionally crumpled.
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah.
So I thought that was cheap. But in the second one, the second Creed, what I noticed was the use of music, you know, and so there's soul and there's blues, and actually the blues kind of got to me, right? You know, because blues always evokes oppression to me, so you always think of, you know, slaves in the fields or people working in a chain gang or of kind of life, you know, kind of being limited and harsh and cruel, because of who you are. Right, it evokes a particular kind of experience in America, you know, and the mixture, so the hip hop and the rap and kind of, you know, it specifies a particular context, in a way that kind of is very different than the other films.
Yeah, well, you were mentioning right at the start, one of the first things you see in Rocky, after he's had his initial fight that opens the film. When he's walking home, he sees the barbershop
Yeah, it's like Jersey Boys. Yeah, it's about
just hanging around on the street
capella,
corner,
harmonizing.
Yeah, and the film starts off with that, and you're saying that harks back to like the '60s,
Yeah,
really, which is 10 years before
or even longer.
Yeah, and then as you go through like the power ballad era in the 1980s,
yes,
and the MTV thing, and I was saying how there are songs in the montages in Rocky IV that are literally narrating what's happening on screen.
Yes,
it was ridiculous,
yes,
like a joke. And yet somehow they're also pop songs that have been written for the film, and they're so specifically tied to the image, and yet there's
so much about selling the soundtrack.
Yeah, so about like selling singles. But then when you get to Creed, that's when rap and hip hop starts coming in, and there's a great bit where he's training. I think it's in the montage where he's training with Rocky for the first time. Rocky's decided to take him on, and get back into boxing, and the music it has like a country vibe underneath, but then a rap or hip hop beat comes on top, and then rap starts on top of that, and then you really get this feeling of the combination of Rocky and Creed in the soundtrack at that point. I thought that was nice.
I mean, one of the reasons why I really like Creed 2 is because it's so much about paternity, and everybody is afforded that paternity. So it's about the reconciliation of fathers and sons, right? So, Rocky goes back to his son at the end, and reintroduces himself to his son and meets his grandson. And then, of course, the whole thing with Drago and his son, that kind of, there's also like a real tenderness in that at the end. And and then there's the thing about, Michael B. Jordan having a baby, right? And the film is imbued with lovely images of, it's almost like that poster I forget the famous 80s poster of the man holding the baby, right? That you have Michael B. Jordan with his child, and it's beautifully lit, and, it kind of, it looks fantastic. But Dolph is given a character and is given a story, and one that, brings in his past, but also makes the focus on his relationship with his son, and what it means to win or not win, and how that affects them, their own relationship. So, it's given a much rounder, richer, playing area than anything afforded in so many of the earlier films. So I like that very much about Creed 2.
Did you think it returned to some quite simple ground with the portrayal of Russia?
Yes and no, because the thing is, they weren't allowed to be in Russia. They'd been exiled to the Ukraine, right? So all of that stuff is facile, as indeed is the reintroduction of the Brigitte Nielsen character and so on. But then the relationship between the father and son, those moments where, it's all about getting revenge for him, and then the film shifts gears, and actually it becomes about a father's feelings for his son, in trouble, and him throwing in the towel. I thought all of that was really moving and rich.
Bit EastEnders for me, that.
Well, I think part of the reason why it's not EastEndery for me is so the difference in quality of the films, between this and the Rocky later ones, is you can see how these rhymes of themes are built into the structure. Drago finally being aware of his son as a human and protecting him, then rhymes with Rocky, going to find his son, and kind of there's a structure in which there are rhymes and resonance, that unfold throughout the structure. Whereas, in the other films, you feel it's like slapdash. So
I think the best film is Creed. I mean, undoubtedly, but my favourite is Rocky Balboa, and maybe that's because I saw it first. But what we mentioned in the previous podcast about Sylvester Stallone's earnestness and lack of irony, I think is at its strongest there, and it's at its most effective there. So like I say, it's a film about mourning, and it's a film that takes the process of mourning seriously, and you feel the depth of Rocky's loss.
Yes.
And when it gets, and so the idea of the film is that this simulated fight between Rocky and the current world champion, who's this guy called Mason Dixon, that happens on TV, and Rocky wins the simulated fight, and it becomes a bit of a talking point around, and Dixon's people come to Rocky saying, let's actually put this on for real. And so the story becomes about kind of getting back in the ring and, you know, what am I doing with my life and is there unfinished business here and all this kind of thing. And there is such a deep earnestness to all of that, and there are so many motivational speeches given, not just by Rocky, who gives some of them, but his son and Marie, the girl who he reconnects with. I actually find it really, really beautiful and very moving, to the point where at the end, it's the fight I like the most out of all the films. I think part of the reason that I think it's the best fight is that it's the best filmed, because it really leans in to a TV aesthetic. It looks like an HBO fight. It's got HBO all over it. It's filmed with TV angles, or it cuts into cinematic angles as well. And at one point it kind of drops out colour and slow-mo, and so it becomes a real cinema fight. But it really leans into kind of on-screen graphics. You know, it's in a casino. You feel the scale of all the people there and all this. But what I said about Rocky 1, where this idea of going the distance comes in, and it comes in just before the fight, really. It's not this thing that's been there the whole time. Just this idea of, I'm not going to be able to beat Apollo Creed, but can I last the distance? No one else ever has. That becomes this thing here, because Rocky is old. And, you know, this guy's young and he's the world champion. You're never going to beat him, but can I last the distance? And it's an idea that is much stronger throughout the course of the film than it was in Rocky 1. That's a big part in the fight, because it's just, you know, can I keep going through these rounds? Can I keep taking all these punches? And there's this line about, it's not about how hard you can hit, it's how hard you can get hit and keep going. Yeah. It's a line that I really loved, where he's talking to his son. That comes back in voiceover, in a remembered voiceover in the fight.
Sketchy, remembered voiceover.
In one of his memories. But I think one of the things that really, really works about that film is how Stallone ages. So you've been talking about how his body becomes this ridiculous thing in the 80s that's not a boxer's body, it's a bodybuilder's body and so on. And in 2006, when Rocky Balboa comes out, it's a body that's been ravaged by time. It's still a big, you know, he obviously works out ridiculously, but he's
ravaged by time and steroids. Yeah. Because you can see all the veins,
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a film that's about mourning and what are you going to do with your life and so on, but it's about aging, and his aging is physical as well as kind of what he does in his life. And that's one of the reasons I think he's so endearing in this one. As we've said, he wants to be endearing all the time. And one of the reasons that he's so endearing in this one is how he ages. It brings the character back down to earth, where he's been this ridiculous, unrealistic thing in the 80s. You know, he's still a Hulk, he's still huge, but he's covered in wrinkles and veins, and he's broken. You know, and he ages kind of gracefully, and to the point where in Creed he gets cancer, he starts losing his hair. You know, the film really kind of puts him through the mill. That's something, I think that might be one of the central things I like about these latter three films, that the character returns to a kind of normality, and he's humbled a bit by that aging process, and it doesn't really shy away from showing you that, right? He does not look good when he's losing his hair.
No, I mean, I think so. You were talking about Satsi, and I was talking about melodrama. And one of the things about the Rocky series as a whole, and one of the things that I think moves me about it, is that it really deals with the essential issues in life. Yeah, which is, you know, about falling in love and building our relationships and, you know, trying to get by and winning and losing and, you know, having children and relationships with children. And so, you know, it's not about what superpower you have and how you're going to be the villain from the next galaxy. Though you could argue that those films, you know, also have relatable themes. But these are really core, kind of. I mean, even myself as a gay man who's never, you know, kind of wanted children and so on, those things resonate. You can see how they are absolutely kind of essential, to people in general and the culture. And the film deals with them, I think, with some sensitivity, actually. And certainly the film doesn't ironize them. It treats them as important. It kind of finds, you know, imaginary resolutions to what are real contradictions. That, you know, kind of separations or ways of thinking of between, you know, fathers and sons or things like that. I think that's one of the strengths of the series. It touches on things that other people can connect to, and it doesn't cheat on them. it might not be the most complex kind of dramatization of the issue, but it's nevertheless kind of taken very seriously, and there's an engagement with the audience on that issue. And I think that's why they end up being moving. Yeah, death, the death of a loved one, and how to rebuild your life. And I mean, those are kind of issues that everybody sooner or later faces, really.
Yeah. And even Sylvester Stallone's have to. And that's actually one of the reasons that when we saw Rambo Last Blood, it was such a letdown, because in Rocky Balboa and Creed, I'd seen what he was capable of doing in terms of taking something seriously, showing you the advancement of the character, how sensitive he was capable of being, Stallone, which Last Blood is just,
it's just garbage.
Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning that Stallone co-wrote the screenplay for both Creed films as well. Yeah.
Was he? I'm not sure he did on the last one.
I think he did, but check it.
I know that on Creed he wrote everything that his character was involved with. I'm not sure he was involved in the rest of it, but he was definitely in charge of the Rocky bits and his dialogue.
Well, I just saw him credited as co-screenwriter, or yeah, I think in Creed 2 with 2 other people.
It looks like it's the same thing with Creed 2, where Rocky was involved, Stallone was involved, but maybe not with the rest of it.
Okay. Well, that's to the film's benefit. And obviously it indicates that at least he had control over, his character, and I'm sure other elements of the film.
Yeah, I mean, he's like the gatekeeper of that whole story.
Mythos.
Yeah. What was your favourite fight?
The one in the second Creed.
With the younger...
With the Dolph Lundgren, and I hope it's not just because it's the most recent one I saw and therefore the most memorable. There was that thing with the trick of hitting the chest, that completely disabled him, and then kind of how that was reprised in the last one. I really like that. Though I must say, I think I'm not much of a boxing fan, and I was very engaged with it, with all of them. So if one posits Raging Bull had fantastically visualized boxing fights. Yeah, and some of them you just feel like this aesthetic pleasure in watching how they are filmed, right? But they're not narrated in the same way. You're not emotionally involved in the fight in the same way that you are in these films. So I like that, kind of pretty much in all of them. But I think, I like the Creed ones best.
I'm not a huge boxing fan either, though I have watched a few fights, and I've paid for some even on pay-per-view. I paid for that stupid fight between Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor, is it? The MMA guy? Ridiculous fucking stupid fight. But what I can tell you for sure, even as someone who's not a fight fan, is that Rocky Balboa and Creed ruined boxing, in that at the end of those films there's just that they kind of embrace and they say, you're a great fighter, you're a great champion, and blah blah blah, and you're a real Creed, he says at the end, because it's about proving that he can live up to his dad's name and so on. That goes on in them, and that happens in real boxing. Like, it starts to happen where at the end of the Mayweather fight, for instance, the Mayweather-McGregor fight, it was, they hug and embrace. It's like, it's a fucking joke clown fight, that was. And they're doing the movie endings in real life.
I like that. Sweet.
Oh, I hate that. I think in the films it's one thing. But in real life, I want people to hate each other. They're out to hurt each other.
Well, what's missing in the films that you get in other boxing films?
Yeah.
And I think it's a real failure. Failure. I mean, I just think these are not quite boxing films. And the reason why is because what they lack is rage. Right? I mean, what makes a person want to go out and kill somebody? Beat someone to a pulp? It's a kind of rage that propels them.
Yeah.
Right? And, kind of the boxing films makes a metaphor of it, by making it about capitalism. These are downtrodden, oppressed people who've been brutally treated by the society, or whose parents got killed, like in Body and Soul, or, something drives them, right? And usually it's poverty and oppression that gives them this rage, right? These films have no rage.
I think Creed does. I think you see rage in Donnie in Creed.
Yeah, that's true.
But that's an exception, I think, to the rest of it.
Yeah.
And actually, I suppose you see rage in Drago's son as well, in Creed 2, actually. Yes. Because he's fighting for his dad. And actually, the bit I like the most about that was when they're re-invited to Russia. And they have that kind of dinner, and Bridget Nielsen shows up and all. And they go out, and the son says, "These people didn't want us; they threw us away. Why are we here?"
Yeah.
Now I felt that, like, yeah, man.
You're right. That's why the Creed films are better than the other Rocky films. Because there's rage. Yeah.
Yeah.
Though, the absence of rage is what made the first Rocky special. So there's that. But anyway, we should maybe wrap up here. So thank you very much for listening. Highly recommend watching the series. I mean, I hate recommending it in a way because there are so many crap films. But actually, watching them all together is a real experience, and I think it's one that if you're attentive, it'll teach you very much about cinema and very much about US culture. All right, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website where you can find all 270 something so far of our podcasts is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Good. I'm going to make a sandwich now.
Say thank you very much.
Oh. Thank you very much for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, do you want a sandwich?